All right, who do we have here?
This is my father, and I think it's probably taking at the time they were married in 1905.
Okay.
They were married in December 1905.
All right, and what was your father's full name?
John Korus.
Okay. And was he the immigrant generation in your family? Was he the one who came over?
Yes, he was 20 years of age when he came over, but from some research my son has done, said that he probably made himself a year older, so he was able to homestead
So he could get
some land on his own.
Right. So he was the one who homesteaded in North Dakota?
Yes, and then his father homesteaded, adjoining land
Okay.
to where he homesteaded. So I was told.
So his whole family came over?
Yes, yeah, he and his brother and three sisters came over. And they came on the same boat as Mom family came. So they became acquainted, on the board, on the trip over.
It's very interesting.
As I can remember.
And
Or being told, I should say.
And this is?
That's my mom. She was 15 years of age when she came over, but I'm thinking this was probably taken when she was 18.
Okay.
3 years later when she was married.
So they were married 3 years after they came over?
Yes. They came over in April of 2002, and they were married in December 7th of 2005.
Okay. And did they homestead nearby each other, their families?
Yes. Where my dad lived, Mom's folks lived maybe a mile east, and Dad's parents homesteaded a mile west, so, or approximately.
Okay. Let's see. Can you tell me about this picture?
Well, that picture was taken, as I was told, of Mom's sister Emily's wedding when they were married. And I think it was 1908. And that's my grandparents, Mom's dad and Mom.
Okay.
And then Mom and...
These two are?
Yeah, the one sitting in front are Mom's John and Albertina Bergstrasser. Now, Bergstrasser, from some material I have, it was spelled with a double S-E-R.
Oh, yeah.
And but most places it's a Z. They must have changed it to a Z after they came over here, I'm thinking.
Yeah. All right. Can you spell their last name for me?
Bergstrazer is the way, but
some of them have a different...
it had original, or some of the material before that, it was two S's instead of a Z. Yeah. So how that got changed, it's hard to say.
Yeah. All right, we're gonna...
And then it's Mom's brother. He was single at the time, between the two couples.
Can you point him out? Okay.
John Berkshire.
Okay. And who are the other people?
Well, it's Emily, Mom's sister Emily, and her husband August Gunst, Gunst.
Okay.
And as I've been told, they lived in Portland, Oregon. They moved to, I don't know just how soon they moved to Portland, Oregon, but that's where I remember them just living.
Okay.
And she also had a large family of 3 girls and 6 of them. I don't recall for sure how many there were, but
Right.
there were at least 3 girls that I know of.
A lot of people.
Few, not as many as my mom had, probably, but there were 9.
Okay. Now we're kind of going to go through your photo album here. And
Boy, there's a lot of information on the back of this.
yeah. Let's see. First, we'll look at this one.
And that's the barn, as I remember, on the farm.
Okay.
And right-hand side is where we milked the cows. I remember there was a cow barn.
Okay.
In the middle was horses, and there was hay. You put hay up on the top, and remember we play up there and on the hay in the barn.
Okay. What kind of games did you play up?
Well, we just slide around
okay.
on.
Yeah. It's always fun. Looks like there's a bunch of horses and
Yes,
cows.
yeah. I'm thinking my dad, no doubt, was a very hard worker, but he had accomplished a lot in the few years that they were over here.
Okay. I have this picture.
Okay, and there was a lot of rock in the land, and I myself don't remember picking rocks, but I'm sure my brothers did and my dad. And this picture is my oldest sister, Emma.
Okay.
And I'm sitting down on the picture in the lower part.
Did you often do things with your oldest sister?
No, she left home when I was probably, well, she was married in 29, and I was only 8 then, and she'd probably been in Fargo. She'd gone to business college, and so she just came, as I remember her just coming home to visit.
Oh, okay.
And she was always dressed very nicely. Both my sisters, my 2 oldest sisters, well, all of them, they had nice clothes. For the time, it wasn't. I thought, well, she always dressed very nicely. But I don't remember, that picture. I'm not old. I wasn't old, I don't. But the picture's been very. I've always found it very interesting. And being it's on the rock pile, to take a picture of a rock pile. There were a lot of rock piles. In fact, I remember my family, they didn't have dumps, but they dispose of their unwanted things. They put it out by the rock piles.
Yeah.
Often thought it'd been interesting to find some relics on those rock piles for the stuff they dispose of. But I think they probably burned a lot of things in those days, early days.
Right. So it looks like you're in a field or a pasture.
Probably out in the field. They'd usually put the rock piles on the edge of the fields where they'd cultivate the land. They were able to work the land better without the rocks, I'm assuming.
All right. Here we have this picture. Looks like maybe you and some of your...
And then Mom always had flower gardens in front of the house. In fact, they'd had fenced in, but I don't know, I think they used to order seed from the seed catalogs, and then she'd plant annual flowers. But there were also, I don't know if there were any perennials. I think she mostly annual flowers.
Okay. Was it a hobby for her?
Well, she just enjoyed it, and I think that's something she missed coming to America. Because I just remember asking her one time, she didn't really like to talk about life in Europe. But one thing she did say one time was, when I did ask her, she said, oh, we had trees and fruit trees. And when they settled out there in North Dakota, I'm sure the trees, we had a lot of trees around our house, as I remember growing up, but they were all planted. And I mean, they had a sort of a grove of trees, and we'd like to play in those trees in the summertime. It was kind of between the house and the garden. So that's about it for flowers.
Okay.
And that's my grandma, Mom, and her mother, and Mom's sister-in-law, her brother's wife.
Okay.
And then Grandma and Grandpa. The only thing I remember about Grandpa was when we visited over there in their house, and he was in bed. It's the only remembrance I have of him. But then Mom's brother and his wife lived just kind of on the same, just a short distance, kind of in the same farmland. I have a picture of Grandma's sod house. We had a family reunion a few years ago, and there's still remains of the sod house. I have a picture here on the.
Okay.
And Uncle John and Kate lived just in the same, just a short distance away. Houses were nearby. But the sod house it's been boarded over, but we could see the thickness by where the window was, the thickness of the sod house.
Well, how about this picture?
That's his mom. And it looks kind of barren out there. I suppose, I have no idea when it was taken, but
And you said it was hard for her to leave all the trees and the fruit trees.
I remember just that one time when she
Yeah.
talked about, I said I don't remember what my question was, but I just remember her saying, oh, we had trees and fruit trees, and it must have really been barren when they homesteaded out there. There were.
I would imagine it was difficult for her during the dirty 30s too, because it would have been so.
Yes, of course, then she had a lot of children, but that did a lot of the work. But I'm sure it wasn't. I remember roasting some kind of crop or grain, and they made coffee. Used it for coffee. I don't think they liked it very well. But she'd take eggs and cream to town, and they had what they called a cream buyer, and then big cans of cream and eggs, and get money to buy groceries. Exchange for groceries. I remember there was this little building where they'd have to test the cream, and I don't know what they tested it for, but they'd pay them, the creamery, or what they called it, a creamery. I don't know what they did with the cream. But one thing I remember is churning butter. We had a churn, and it was a crock with a plunger and a wooden stick, and we'd have to churn butter. Oh, it was a tedious job. But that's one thing I remember doing.
Yeah.
And we'd also make ice cream in them around the straw piles. The ice would stay kind of maybe up until July. I remember on 4th of July they'd get chop ice out from under those straw stacks.
Really?
And we'd make ice cream. And we'd have to turn it by hand.
And was that the kind of, did you make ice cream usually just for kind of celebrations?
Yeah, usually I remember it, having it in the summer, which would have been a great treat. I don't know, but it was something, the ice would form under the straw, and the straw piles, because I'm sure we never were able to buy ice.
Yeah.
It was just the ice that we found it. And I suppose that's Dad taken at the same time. But I'm amazed, for being a farmer, how Dad was always dressed up.
Yeah.
And Mom, too. You think of... Well, I think I have some pictures of Dad in overalls, but a lot of them... The one with the bow tie, and... Because they'd always dress up and go to church every Sunday. We went to country church, and... Because I remember it, we had a car, but I'm sure that the earlier years before I was born, they went to church used the horses. And they did all the farming, as I remember, the called them, didn't have combines, they were called binders, the machine that would cut the grain and bind it and make shocks out of it. I don't know what they called it when it was a bundle. Remember, had to do that. Probably helped at that a little bit when making shocks. And there was an art to make a shock so it wouldn't fall apart. I remember. Probably I was pretty young, so I left home when I was like 15. But I'm amazed at these pictures, how well they were dressed.
Well, they seem to have done very well.
And I'm sure they just ordered everything, because I remember them had Montgomery Ward and Sears Roebuck catalogs and Spiegel's catalog, and Mom would, and what was a treat with Christmas time, Mom would order my sister and I, we always dressed alike a lot. You really remember some nice little dresses she'd order us for Christmas.
Yeah. So did you order most of your clothes then?
Mom did, I never, and Mom also sewed. She had a sewing machine, and she made sew dresses for us. Okay. That's about it for... that is... you don't see it too well, but it's in the garden. I think they're...
Yeah.
I think I'm on it. And some of my siblings.
How about this one?
That's a group of school children. And this is a Rittenbach, and that's my cousin, my young cousin, Bergstrasser. Should have looked at her before. I don't know who else is on it.
Can you tell me about this?
Well, it's probably taken at the country school. I don't know if I had looked at it before, I might have been able to identify them. This might be my sister there, but I'm not sure.
Are you in this picture?
Well, yes, I think I'm in the middle, in the back there.
With the big smile?
Yeah, but it's my head.
And you said you went to school largely with your cousins and your...
Cousins and neighbors, like the Rittenbachs, and they were from the second family. You know, my aunt had died when they had several older, but then they had another family, and I know this one is from her second from my aunt's second family, or her husband's second family.
Okay. What kind of classes did you take at this schoolhouse?
Well, classes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure we'd just the basic things like history and arithmetic and spelling, English probably. One thing I remember, you know, the church we went to, they had German pastors, and when studying for confirmation, I had to study in German, and I was confirmed in German. And I probably wasn't much in favor of, you know, I would rather have had it in English, but the pastors were German. Yeah. And so my confirmation, you know, I suppose you'd call her protesters, you know, but I guess we had no choice because the pastors were German, you know, so we had to learn the commandments, and then in confirmation we had to recite in German whatever the questions were or whatever. But then I wasn't alone, you know, it was all the whole people my age that also had to do this. And there was there were Scandinavian people that lived in the neighborhood, Nelsons and Swansons and Andersons, and they had, we had the country church, but in town in Danoff they had English, you know, the Scandinavian people had an English. And I don't know, but I was kind of envious of them because they were, you know, being confirmed in English, and we had to do the German, and it wasn't easy. You know, kind of protesting it and at the same time going along with it.
Was that the only time that you really used German when you were a child?
Probably, and I suppose my my dad spoke good English. I think he, you know, went to school in Germany before he came to America. But Mom, I think she just kind of learned the English on her own after they came here, and Dad even learned how to read the English. Mom would read the German Bible, I think. You know, it's probably the extent of her reading this. At least I'm assuming she read. So she might have had some German schooling.
So who helped you then learn your things for confirmation in German?
Well, my mom and dad would help us, but then the German pastors we'd have class, you know, preparing for confirmation or Sunday school. I guess we didn't really have Sunday school until we went to prepare for confirmation.
Were church services in German then too?
The church services were in German, and the women would sit on one side, and the men and the boys would sit on the other. And the walking in, the men were on the left side, and the women on the right side. But then later on, the kids would always have to sit up in the front pews.
Why is that?
You know, in church.
Yeah.
You know, we did sit with my mother. The kids would always kind of sit up in front. I don't know. What the reason was for it, I don't know.
Right. This is a small one, but it looks like it's in front of the school again.
It's in front of the school, and I'm sure I'm on there. I could overhauls to school, but I'd wear a dress, and I remember this one dress that had a big collar, and Mom had dyed it. It was kind of a purple. I think she'd dye a lot of clothes. Another thing Mom would do is they'd use gasoline, or I think it was gasoline for dry cleaning. Stuff that couldn't be washed, like suits, my mom's men's suits. They'd dry clean them in I think it was gasoline. Must have been gasoline.
Yeah.
I remember, they'd hang out for days in the line to air it out because they'd smell, but it was we never took anything to dry cleaners. That's pretty much it. And those were quite a few cousins. There were some Brookstreisers and neighbor kids. There was a Gorder, Eleanor Gorder. I think they were Scandinavian. I was always envious of those Scandinavian kids that could speak English. I suppose we had a German accent. And I was envious of these Scandinavian kids because they could speak, they spoke English a lot. More than I roomed that year. I went to high school in my freshman year in Danif. I roomed with, and her name was Nelson, a neighbor, and her mom and brother would come and visit, and they talk Scandinavian. I couldn't understand a word of it, and I suppose I don't know. I suppose we talked some German to our parents. But I remember always being envious of those Scandinavian because they spoke a lot more English than we did.
Did you speak English when you went to school?
Yes,
Yeah.
of course. And I must have been bilingual. I must have been able to speak English and German when I went to school. Because I'm sure, if I was confirmed German, and that was when I was 13, 14 years old. And that's my dad and horses.
Looks like.
Of course, the harvesting was always drawn by horses and the teams. I remember thrashing, and that was always a big thing. We had a thrashing machine, and we'd go out there and where the grain came out, they'd haul those with horses. But they had one thing they had in the thrashers was, I remember, was a big tractor that would run the thrashing machine. But then the grain was brought in by wagons and horses, and then
what is this that they're pulling here?
I'm sorry?
What the horses are pulling. Is that the
Oh,
budki?
but is that the budke? Yeah, are there only two horses?
Yep.
Yeah, they're pulling the budke.
Okay.
And Carol, my daughter, was attending Concordia College, and she had some friends that were from Russia, and they came over here, and they knew what a budke was.
Really?
Yeah, and some of them, I said,
And that's what. Did somebody build it to?
I don't know if they bought it or built it. It was kind of round, but it had a little window, the door in the back, and a little window in the front where the driver would sit and had the reins to the horses, and But it was a way of life, and we just didn't know any better, whatever we was. But I don't remember a lot of things. I remember because in the summertime we used it as a playhouse. They'd put it over, by the trees, and we'd have a playhouse because it had benches on both sides.
Did it actually work to keep you warm on your way to school?
I suppose we dressed very properly, and there wasn't any. But I remember Dad had a foot warmer. They'd put charcoal in it that we could keep our feet warm on Sundays if we'd go visiting someplace and it was cold, and we'd probably ride in an open sleigh, but we just had a lot of blankets, and we didn't always go in this budki. I remember this charcoal, it was kind of a metal box with I think what they called it, charcoal. That they never had any fires, but
I'd imagine that would be dangerous.
Yeah.
It was made out of wood.
But it was kind of enclosed. It was like it was metal or. We had a furnace in our basement, and then there was a big grill, at the top of the furnace. But Dad in my time, he had a truck, and he'd go to the coal mine out west around Wilton, North Dakota. And my aunt lived there. But they'd get a supply of coal, and we had a bin in the basement where they'd bring enough coal to last the winter and to heat the furnace. And I just remember those cold mornings sitting on that grill above the furnace. We'd get dressed up and be warm, because we also wore long underwear in the winter, a whole suit of underwear. And it was cold, so we always managed to keep warm.
Looks like more horses.
No, are they hitched up to something, or are they just?
Yeah, it looks like they're attached to a wagon of some sort. There's 5 of them?
Yeah, well, I remember having that many horses at harvest time on a binder, what they called a binder, and then there was another machine a heather, they called it. A heather would hit cut the grain, and it was on a conveyor. And I just remember 2 different harvesting machines, and they do have I don't know, 4 or 5 horses or a bunch of horses pulling those harvesting machines. And then I think when they cultivated, they probably, seeding, they had a big box, they called it a drill, or as I remember, a drill, and that would be quite a few horses to pull it. And they'd put the grain in this long box, and then there must have been little holes that seeded it. I just remember a lot of horses that would take to pull those.
Now, when it was harvest time, did the neighbors come over, or was it a kind of a big deal? Did neighbor families help each other with harvest?
No, see, with a large family, my brothers and my dad would do the harvesting, but the threshing was kind of more of a neighborhood. I think maybe not all the farmers had threshing machines, and then they'd probably use or share the thresher and probably get some extra help. I think in earlier years, my dad probably had, was my cousin, whose mother, died in that fire. He was probably pretty young, and I think my mom and dad raised him, when the mother died. And he was kind of like the hired man for mom and dad. And they were always close friends, and he got married later on. And his wife, Pauline, she was a jolly person and a lot of fun, but mom and dad always stayed real close to them. And we even did after mom and dad died, with Jake and Pauline. Because he was like a member of the family. My mom and dad raised him, or he lived with them. I don't know. Oh, and that's a picture of them.
Okay.
The same one I think we saw before, Grandma and Grandpa Bergstraser and Mom and Dad, and when Mom's sister got married to Emily, and then Mom's brother. It was kind of a family picture. That's what it was, my mom and her sister and Mom's, my dad and her sister's husband.
How many siblings did your mom have?
She had the sister and brother. But interesting, my son just told me, who's done a lot of research, in the family, that Dad's mother had 15 children. She'd given birth to, but only Dad had a brother Jake, who died in the flu epidemic of 1918, and he had three sisters. Lydia, and Maria, the one that died in the fire, Rittenbach. She was married when they came over, and then Regina. So he had a brother, but I think my son told me that in the obituary, he found an obituary of my grandma, my dad's mother. She had remarried after her, that she'd given birth to 15 children, but actually only 3, 4, 5 of them, survived in my lifetime. Oh, and that one we call the milkmaids. My sister Emma must have been home on her vacation, and I suppose Frida was still living at home. She lives now in Oregon. She's still alive, but she has severe Alzheimer's, but her husband is taking care of her. In fact, but she went out to Oregon when Aunt Emily like I said, they moved to Portland, Oregon. As I remember, they always lived in Portland. But Aunt Emily would come home with some of the kids every summer and visit Mom, or many summers. And one summer, when Frida never went to high school. She just graduated from 8th grade. But then Aunt Emily had a daughter the same age as Frida, and they asked Frida to come out there. And she went out there and lived with them. I suppose she was probably maybe 20 or so. And I remember she went out there and lived with them, and she picked strawberries, and she also worked in a woolen mill. But then she met her future husband in Oregon, state of Oregon, and they still live in Salem, Oregon. And her husband now she's had Alzheimer's since about 1999. But they're in a retirement home, and he's celebrating his 90th birthday, the 13th of May of this year. In fact, her daughter invited me to come out there. They're having a celebration for his 90th birthday, but being I'm moving that weekend, wasn't able to go, and it's difficult for me to travel. alone anyway with my bad eyesight. But my daughter from Minneapolis works for Northwest Airline in the terminal in Minneapolis. So she has some flying privileges. She can fly, and I can fly at a reduced rate. And she would have taken me out there, but she wasn't able to stay, so I would have had to come back alone. Well, I couldn't do it because I have movers coming I'm in the process of moving that weekend. But
do you remember any particular stories about milking?
well, I remember milking when the cow kicked the pail, and the pail had a cut on, or was a crack, and then cutting my arm. I remember that, and I probably didn't milk a great deal.
Yeah.
Probably, there were always so many other. But I suppose we all milked. I don't know if we all milked that day or if we just posed for a picture. But I think we probably actually milked. Because it's Delilah and I and Frida and Emma, isn't it? And, but I always thought it was funny. A fun picture to talk about.
Was milking sort of the domain of the girls in the family? Or
Yeah, it seems that the girls did a lot of milking. The boys, I suppose, did more harder farm work. But it seemed like they did. But I'm sure the boys, I don't remember the boys milking that much. But I'm sure they did, before my time. They must have. That's Mom and me and my sister, I think. And they planted shrubs around this garden that was out in the front. It was fenced in. We had to fence it in because otherwise chicken and, that kind of roamed the yard. We had to keep the chickens and the animals out of the... So there was always a fenced-in garden. But then there was this kind of a shrub. I used to remember the name of it, too. It's kind of a flowering shrub. Mom liked flowers, and well, like I said, I think she ordered seed we always had seed catalogs in the mail, and they might have sold some seed in town, too. But one of the things that we'd go shopping in Harvey for clothes, because Denver didn't have any clothing stores. We'd go to Harvey, North Dakota, which was probably closer than, I know it was closer. A penny store we'd go to. Because I remember confirmation going to shop for a dress. I had to get a white dress, and for a long time I kept it. It was a dress with a little jacket. It was white. We'd always have to get white dresses for confirmation. So I remember going shopping in Harvey was kind of one of the highlights of growing up, But Mom sewed for us a lot and ordered a lot of things from the catalogs more than shopping. I remember just the one shopping trip I remember was for my confirmation dress.
And about how old were you when you were confirmed?
When I was confirmed?
Yep.
About 14 probably.
Okay. Your mom's gardens, did she plant flowers and vegetables in the same big garden, or did she have
No, they had the separate flower garden in front of the house that was fenced in, and then the vegetable garden was, I thought, was huge. Well, I know they'd plant a lot of potatoes. It was, of course, I had an outhouse. We didn't have plumbing in our house on the farm. Mom and Dad retired in early 40s, and they bought a house in the edge of town, and that had a bathroom and running water. But we had the outhouse, and I remember that. It reminds me of the outhouse. It was the garden was extended past, and we had rhubarb and horseradish that would kind of grow annually. But I remember having a lot of potatoes, because I'm sure we had raised enough potatoes to last all winter. And sure we had a lot of other crops, like root crops, I think carrots, and I don't remember what the other crops were. My mom canned a lot, corn. And I remember the corn, now we boil the corn, sweet corn for a few minutes. And remember, it would be boiling all afternoon. I don't know if it was field corn, but I remember cooking corn that would be boiling for hours. Why they did that, I suppose to get it tender. And I think that's Mom with, we always had kittens and barn, they'd multiply out in the barn kittens. And we always had dogs, always had a dog. We'd use the dog when we'd go out and bring the cattle in for milking time from the fields or the grazing.
Did you treat these like pets?
Yeah, well, the kittens, we used to play with them. When they were little, there'd always be all ages of kittens. There would be new crops every year. And we'd play with the kittens. Yeah. I think we even tried to dress them sometimes, put doll clothes on them. Okay. We were looking at these pictures, she'd say, look, I always had white socks and you had black socks. I don't know if it's in that picture or not. Or black shoes. She thought she was dressed nicer than I was.
And which one of, who
Gilila is the youngest sister. In fact, she's also has Alzheimer's, and she's in a home in Phoenix, Arizona, Sun City.
She's in a little rocking chair. Was that something that?
Well, it was her rocking chair, and she claimed that rocking chair. I remember it was a nice wooden rocking chair, and I don't know whatever she ended up with it or where it ended up.
And is that you standing next to her?
And that's me standing next to her. I think I'm wearing white socks there.
Yep.
But there was one where I was wearing black socks, and she always reminded me that she was dressed nicer than I was. But, we had some good times together in later years, too. And we played a lot together, I'm sure. We played a lot of house and with dolls and...
This one's kind of small.
And that's another one of us together. And that's a garage in the background. And I remember something about that garage. My dad was kind of into politics a little bit. And he was campaigning. He was a Republican, he grew up as a Republican. And he'd have some of the candidates come and he'd have pictures, or they'd give him pictures of the candidates, and we'd have to clean out that garage. And I suppose other people would come there.
Would the candidates actually come to your house?
Yeah, he must have been there, but, I think it was in the years of the Bill Langer when Bill Anger was Canada, wasn't he governor? I think finally became a governor of North Dakota, and what was he impeached or something? I don't remember. There was some history about it. But another thing my dad would say, he was on during the before World War II, he was on the draft board, and they had draft boards in the county. And Dad made a remark one day. He says, I was a draft dodger when I came to America. This was one reason he came, because the Russians were going to enforce the Germans from Russia to join the Russian army. And that, I think, was one reason they were instrumental in leaving Russia, because from what I remember or been told, but Catherine was the ruler of Russia, Catherine the Great, and she encouraged the Germans to come to live in Russia, and then had promised them that they wouldn't have to, they'd be exempt from a lot of the things that the Russian government required. But then there was a new ruler, what was Frederick or whatever his name was. He was going to conscript the young men to join the Russian army, and Dad said, well, he was a draft dodger because he came to America to avoid being drafted. But he was on the draft board. Okay, that's my sister Delila and I, and we were close, just 2 years apart, but I'm sure we played well together.
What's that?
In spite of our little scraps we had. She was kind of feisty.
Yeah.
She had we had different personalities. That's a granary in the background. That's where we'd play in the summertime. We'd play house up there. And but then in the fall they'd fill the granary with grain after the thrashing. I guess we sort of had a happy life, I think, Just ordinary kids. Now that's a picture I found in my my oldest sister's album after she passed away, and her children allowed us to take the pictures because I didn't have any of my own with our dolls, and I don't remember the dolls, but they were big dolls. And I of course don't remember when the pictures were taken, but it's both my sister and I. Are there two of us there?
Yep.
With her, and I think it's Mom's clothes basket was kind of an oblong. She did all the washing. She had kind of my first memory of a washing machine was kind of a wooden washing machine, and it was, what was it run by? Because it's, but we had a lot of clothesline, and I remember having to hang out clothes and clothesline and taking it down. And she had, but I remember that big basket where we'd carry the wet clothes out to the line.
Is that your house behind you in this picture?
Yes, yeah, it's our house behind there. It's taken about in the side view of the house, I think. The clotheslines were out and back. But I've always thought it was an interesting picture for me to find after not being in my sister's album. And that picture was taken, there was a we had the farmyard, the barn was fenced off away from the house, so the animals couldn't roam over to the. So there was a gate to get into the barnyard, and I always thought that was the nicest picture. Me sitting on the post, and with one of my older brothers. Well, three of my brothers are on there: Gideon, Wilbert, and Willie. And then Delilla's there too, isn't she? And then the little girl besides me.
Yep. Right
There?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. But it reminds me of the days of the farm and the gate we had to go through to keep out the barnyard was fenced in, keep out the animals from getting into roaming around or getting out on the road out to the highway or to the road,
But you let the chickens run around.
The chickens would get through the fence,
Yeah.
They would, but Mom had that flower garden in front that was also fenced in. So in the garden was fenced to keep the animals out.
Because they ran around, did that make it hard to find eggs?
No, there was a chicken coop that was near the barn in the fenced-in barnyard. There was a chicken coop, and they had shelves where they had nests for the chickens, but the chickens were supposed to lay, and most of the eggs were in the chicken coop. Once in a while, we'd find some of the chickens had made their own nests outside the chicken coop, but mostly we gathered the eggs and the chickens would go in there at night to roost in the chicken coop. And that's what I find interesting there is the hats that Delilah and I wore at that age, we had pretty. And Mom. And it was probably before my youngest sister was born.
Looks like you're all dressed up.
Yeah, we are. It must have been some occasion to be wearing hats. Probably Easter. Probably wore hats for Easter. Am I thinking? But I can't remember at the time.
Was Easter an important celebration for you guys?
I don't remember too much about Easter. I remember one highlight we had in the summertime was going to the Wells County Fair.
Oh,
And we'd be, I suppose it was Mom and Dad's idea, we had a lot of gophers in the fields, or in the prairies. And we'd catch gophers, and my brothers would help us. And we'd save the tails, and we'd earn money to go to the fair so we could have spending money. And I don't remember, probably got a penny per gopher tail. But, I think it was more psychological, but I remember the fair. That was the highlight of our summer. We'd go to the Wells County Fair every year, and Dad in my time, they had a fence, near the grandstand, and we'd go early to park up to that fence, and we'd sit in the car, and we could watch the grandstand stuff. But then we'd also go on rides. And I remember going home and having a stomach ache because we'd eat I know what we ate and drank, treats. I remember not feeling good. I remember that one year from having eaten and drank or whatever we had. But we also packed lunches and took lunches along to the fair. Yeah, but we'd get some treats we could buy in the fairgrounds. But that was kind of the highlight of our year. And at Christmas time, we'd always have to go church programs, and all the kids would have to take part in, and make a recitation of some kind, or sing or something. So that's a few things I remember of my childhood. Actually we only had one door, a front door, steps, big high, few steps up, and they kind of to the kitchen. We had when you entered into the front door, there was a sink and a pump where we'd pump water out of the cistern. We had a cistern in the basement. I don't know when my dad put that in, or he probably had somebody put it in. But it was, I think it was rainwater. Just collected, that filled the cistern. We had a windmill and a well over in the barnyard fence, and they had what they called a summer kitchen over there too by the windmill.
Can you explain a summer kitchen to me?
Well, it had a stove, a wooden, and Mom would heat, a big full size. She did some canning over there, I think, in the summertime too hot. It was a full kitchen stove. And she'd heat the water over there for washing clothes. And then the cream separator was in that summer kitchen too. And we'd separate all the milk. And then there was to keep the cream fresh and cool. When the water came out of the well, the windmill, and then there was a tank. They'd put the cream can in there and seal it, and they secured it somehow so the water wouldn't get into it. And then the water would run through there, the cold water, and into the stock tank. That was all right by the summer kitchen, the windmill, and that's how they kept the cream fresh. And I suppose they'd probably take it to town once Friday night, or we'd all go to town. And they also had in town, when I was kind of in the early years, they'd show free movies on the side of a building in town. And that was our Friday night. Mom and Dad would visit with the neighbor. Everybody would come to town, and then bring their cream and eggs and salad, and shop their groceries, and then the kids could sit out there, and I don't know if we sat on the ground or watch the movies on the side of a building in the empty lot. But that's Mom and Dad and some of us kids. Front of our house. The garden was out in front. And then I think you can just see some buildings over in the barnyard, or
Yeah, a few.
I don't know if it's a barn or is it the chicken coop.
Not sure.
Anyway, that was life on the farm. And that's Mom and Dad with she's my little brother, I think. Just the one child out there. I think it's Ray. So that must have been, he was born in 1926. In fact, his birthday is next 10th of May. He'll be 81 years old now.
Everybody looks all dressed up again.
I'm sorry?
They look all dressed up again.
Yeah, Mom and Dad dressed up a lot. And so it's usually probably taken on Sundays. They always dressed up for church. Never missed church. And, yeah. Mom always had nice clothes. And then Dad's sister Lydia, she was married to William Wall. But they were kind of poor. Mom would always take clothes over to them. And I remember going over, I don't know what the problem was, but they had like dirt floor in their house or something. I don't remember. They weren't as well off as my parents were. I guess we consider them pretty, I suppose, even tough times. Consider them did. we're pretty well off.
Looks like
Oh, that's the dolls. Yeah, like I said, those pictures were found in my oldest sister. She passed away in, was it 97? I think about 97. And then her daughters let me have some of the pictures that I, wasn't even aware that they had. So it was a nice find.
Do you remember receiving these dolls as gifts or anything?
I don't even remember the dolls. They were probably Christmas gifts.
Yeah.
And Christmas was church program was the highlight of the Christmas program or the Christmas season. And Mom and Dad and I remember Mom had a table in her living room, about the size of this table, but it was a wooden table. It was long. And they'd have a little Christmas tree on that, and I remember having real candles that they'd light. And I think we'd light them when we'd come home from the Christmas program. And we'd each get one gift. I remember Mom and Dad shopping, I just remember a few Christmases when it was. And Mom and Dad would probably be away, and we'd kind of hunt the closets and find those Christmas gifts. The thing we weren't supposed to do, but I think one time we found some. And we probably never did admit it to our parents that we did. But I'm sure we got these dolls. Must have been Christmas gifts. And I wish I could remember something about it, but I don't. And that's Delilah and me out in the yard again. Are there some animals with us?
Oh, there's a wagon in the background.
A wagon.
And
Yeah, we always had a wagon. We'd pull it. I know Delilah and I, had this younger brother and younger sister. They were born in 26 and 28. And one time we were supposed to be watching Ray when he was little. And there was some kind of a thing they had out in the farmyard. I don't know, it was kind of, we put Ray in there. We were supposed to watch him, and we put him in there. It was kind of I don't know what they used it for. It was open, kind of slots. But anyway, we put Ray in there, and I remember we got kind of punished for putting him in this. It was something they used for animals. And my sister would remind me that she was better dressed than I was because she had white socks and I had to wear black socks. And I think we were both kind of dressed pretty well.
Yeah. You both look really cute.
And I suppose she's only about 3 years old and I'm probably 5. So, anyway. And I think that's my mom's brother, her only brother, John, and Aunt Kate, and I'm thinking maybe it's their wedding picture.
Okay.
Now Kate had 3 boys, at least 3 boys, but she had a little girl that I can remember, and anyway, the little girl died when she was a baby. And it's the only funeral I remember. I remember her in that little casket and how sad it was, and how sad she was. She had this one little girl, and she died, and I don't remember what the story behind the cause of her death, but that's what I remember about Aunt Kate. But now, I don't know if he has any living children. I think there's one, the youngest one. There was a Norman. There were two that are probably deceased. But they lived over by near Grandma and Grandpa's mom's parents. Oh, that must be the war days. That we were in Boston. We lived on Boylston Street in Boston, but we went over a couple blocks where there were nicer homes than in the block we lived at. They were nice. And we went there with a group of the sailors from his division. And so that was taken in 1944, probably that fall after I came out there. Those were some happy days. In spite of the war, we had our enjoyment. We were young. We went out to eat some. And
Was the war really scary for you at the time?
the war?
Yeah.
No, I suppose we were kind of concerned about, there were some risks, involved. That the ship he was on, it was such a big ship that they never had any escorts. And I think, and there were some, when they were, in the winter making trips to Europe, there were some bad storms, and one time the ship, they were told us, what they call it, listing, or, from the bad wind. But, there was always risk involved. We were aware of during the war, what could have. I had some good experiences and saw a lot of the East Coast and the West Coast. And that was taken, my dad developed cancer in 1950. And he was in the hospital and had been diagnosed as lung cancer. Dad was a smoker. And I guess in early years they made their own cigarettes. But after when my dad, Mom said, those lucky strikes, that's what causes, she knew it was the cigarettes. But it was a wet spring in 1950, and he'd been in the hospital in Bismarck, and the roads were flooded to get from Bismarck up to Sheridan County. So they took the train and came to Fargo. And my sister, who I had lived with in Fargo, these pictures were taken in their home. They came, they decided to come to Fargo in the train. And Mom was dressed so nicely again, and Dad dressed up. And then after the waters receded, they did, or somebody probably came and got them from my older sister that lived in Goodrich, which was near Danoff. And he passed away that August. And I think this was taken I know it was taken before Doug was born. He was born in April. And we've got some group pictures taken that same day. And my sisters, Delilah and Chris, came from Wyoming. And who else was there? Well, Em and John and Bill and I. It was in April before Doug was born. He was born the 25th, so this must have been March or April of 1950. So, they knew it was terminal. And Mom took care of him when they went back home. They lived in they had retired and lived in where they had running water and a bathroom. They moved from the farm. My brother Wilbur got married, and he lived in the farmhouse, and his wife remodeled a house and did a nice job. In fact, then they replaced the farmhouse with a new house that was pre-built. But that was 1950. Was it? Is Dad on there too? Is it just Mom?
Right there.
Yeah, Dad's there too. And Norma, the youngest, lives in California. And she's a young, she'll be 80 next year. She's had a nice husband and 2 children, and had a good life in California. She's lived out there. She graduated from Concordia College and then went out. She taught school in Minnesota first, and then she went out. Some of she and her teacher friends went to Colorado and decided to do office work instead of teaching, and then ended up going in California, and she met her husband, and she taught out there, California. She's a grandma now of 2 little girls. Like when she was 39 when she was married, and then she had 2 children shortly thereafter, and she was a grandma, like, was it 5, 6 years ago? Or was Emma 5 years old? And she said, "I'm too old to be a grandma." Yeah, she thought she was, grandmas become grandmas at earlier age, but she's a nice, dear sister. The other 2 sisters are both have Alzheimer's. One's in a nursing home. The other one is her 90-year-old husband's taking care of her. Is Emma on there too? Yeah, and she passed away.
Kind of a special family picture.
Yeah, it really is. Then at the time, my other sister was living in Goodrich, North Dakota, which is a town right next to Daniel in Sheridan County. She never had any children of her own. She had an adopted son. And that's it. Bill enlisted in the Navy in October 1942, and he went to boot camp in Chicago, and then they sent him to electrician school in Detroit, Michigan. And everything, was pretty short-term in schools. And then he was shipped to, in the spring of '44, he was shipped out to what they call Treasure Island, is where the big naval station was. And from there he was assigned to this ship in the spring of '44, or '43, I'm sorry, '43, because we were married then in October of '43. But he served on this ship from the spring of '43 until November of '45. His entire, years in the Navy, and traveled the world. Trips as far as Bombay, India, and the Pacific, and a lot of trips to Australia and islands, and carrying troops and bringing back casualties and replacements. Then on the East Coast, they prepared for the invasion of Europe. And then they continued to take troops over there and bring troops and casualties and prisoners. They brought prisoners of war from Germany back to the United States, and some of them were housed here in Clay County in Moorhead, Minnesota. Some of the prisoners of war. I don't know if their ship brought them back, but they were set out here south of, or north of Moorhead. They worked in farms, truck farms. It's the prisoners of war. And of course, after the war, they had to take them back to Germany. I think they were treated pretty well compared to what the U.S. prisoners that were taken in Germany and Japan, well, Germany and the Pacific too. And then this is my mom and my brother. It probably had drowned while he was serving in the Navy in the New Caledonia in the Pacific. And when he was shipped overseas, Bill and I were in San Francisco, and Bill was on leave there, and so we were the last ones. In fact, while Bill was in the service, I always had to get jobs because he didn't get much pay. He started out at $21 a month. This was his pay when he was in the Navy, and then he had got some promotions. It was a little more, but then also the government also paid for the spouse, but anyway, he was sent out to San Francisco, and I worked in San Francisco. I worked for the Southern Pacific Railway. They had a big office building right down by the ferry building, and I got him a date, and I've got some pictures where we went out to eat, and one of the girls I worked with, and and then he never, I was the last one to see him. He never came back, then 45 he drowned. But Mom, it was tough on Mom to lose, she had 4 sons in the service and 3 son-in-laws, my 2 sisters and then my husband. But they all survived except. And then he was buried over there in New Caledonia, and then after the war they were allowed to have his body sent back, and he's buried at Fort Snelling. They could have had him buried, in the cemetery lot in Sheridan County, but they decided to have him buried. They gave him a choice, Fort Snelling. So we visit his grave there whenever we're in the cities. In fact, Mom, my niece graduated from nursing school in 1958, and Mom went with her daughter Emma to the graduation, her nurse's graduation, and then she got to visit Willie's grave. They went to Fort Snelling. And I think, because she didn't go there for the burial, my sister and I went to Minneapolis and that was quite an experience in it. But it's a beautiful cemetery, Fort Snelling. Oh, we were there, we had a family reunion there a few years ago, and we all went to visit Fort Snelling. Oh, it's mammoth. The grave sites there.
Tell me about this.
It's a scrapbook I kept while Bill was in the service. And he started a log of all of his trips, and I think it's just amazing what he did. He just started, in showing every trip that the ship made while he was on board. He started it in his writing, and he showed where they left and where they departed each time from the United States, the number of days it took, and then the dates when they returned from all their trips in the Pacific. And I don't know how long he kept it, then I kept it. He did a better job of writing than I did. And then of all the trips in the Atlantic until November 1945 when he was discharged. And he, I don't know what the date is for his first trip or when he boarded the ship.
Looks like May 6th, 1943.
1943 until December 45. So he had good duty considering, what always felt that it was good duty compared to what some of the people had to sacrifice for World War II. But it's been interesting for me and my family my kids have enjoyed looking at the records and what I've kept here, information. In fact, when the ship was in Boston, while I was out there, the ship had what they called dances in a hotel in Boston. They'd have it 2 nights because only half of the crew could attend one night, and I've got some great pictures of us there in what's called the Hotel Bradford in Boston. But the ship would, the government paid for it, and had all the beverages they wanted. The pictures show a lot of bottles of beer, and the tables are full of them, But it was really a nice gesture of the Navy to provide that, had dances. It was during the wartime. So that's a record of the Navy and my husband's years in the Navy.
That's great. Thanks a lot.
These are the remains of the sod house, and it's been covered by wood. But we had a family reunion in Bismarck, North Dakota, and we spent a day up in Sheridan County. And so a picture was taken of me and my kids at the sod house. It's kind of deserted, been deserted and weeds growing around it, but there was enough left to photograph it, what left of it. And we went inside and you could see the thickness of the sod where the window was. It was like a foot thick, or maybe bigger, more than a foot thick. But I remember visiting Grandma and Grandpa. My mom's parents had lived in that house until they died. They lived there from the time they came in 1902 until they passed away. And I think Grandma lived till in the 30s when I was a senior, going to in high school in probably 35 or 36. But I remembered Grandpa one time when he was in bed, and I remember, they had a bed in the living room. It was just one living room. The bedroom was right in there, and there was kind of a stove in the middle, and then there was a bed sort of. I remember sleeping with my great aunt, Mom's grandma's sister. One time, I think I was probably over there when when Ray or Norma were born. Because all the kids, out of the 11 kids, 10 were born at home, in the farm at Denoff. And my youngest sister, and I remember Mom going to she was born in November. She was born in Drake, North Dakota, in the hospital. She was the only one out of the 11. And I remember, I can still see Mom out in that little entry hall with this, putting on her overshoes. It was November. She was born November 20. Putting on her overshoes, and had a little suitcase. And of course, came home with a baby. But, I didn't know where she was going. I was 7 years old. I, that there was going to be a baby.